They say you never really know someone until you see what they do when no one's watching. Sheriff Maylene Carter was the kind of woman people trusted with their lives. A 44-year-old mother, wife, and the first female sheriff in the long, dusty history of Behar County, Texas. She was tough, principled, and hell-bent on justice. Her name meant something around these parts. She was the woman who showed up when everyone else ran. The woman who put traffickers, abusers, and dirty cops behind bars, sometimes with her own hands, always with her own gun. But on the night of June 12th, that gun was turned not on a criminal, not on some drug dealer from the South Side, but on her own husband. 10 shots, center mass, point blank, and then silence. When responding officers arrived, the front door was open. The lights inside were dim. On the floor of the master bedroom lay Lucas Carter, 47, former Marine, school custodian, and all-American dad. At least that's what people thought. His body was riddled with bullets, 10 to be exact. Blood soaked the beige carpet. His hand was still clutching the edge of the bedsheet. Standing over him, still in uniform, still wearing the badge that once symbolized everything good and strong in this county, was Sheriff Carter herself. Her service weapon, a department-issued Glock .40, lay on the floor beside her boots. She didn't resist, didn't speak, not until they asked her what happened. Then she looked up, straight into the eyes of the arresting officer, a deputy who'd once trained under her, and said just 3 words. He touched her. The entire room froze. Everyone knew who her was. Addie Carter, 9 years old, their daughter. Within hours, the story exploded. National media picked it up before sunrise. Texas sheriff guns down husband in shocking domestic incident. Mother, cop, killer? Justice or murder? Every outlet had a different headline, but all of them asked the same question. Why did she do it? But here's the thing. In small towns, justice and gossip travel on the same road. And while some people saw Maylene as a murderer, others were already calling her something else. A mother who did what the system never would. The town was split in half, torn down middle like an old prayer book. One side couldn't believe it. They'd seen Lucas at PDA meetings, baseball games, the grocery store. He was polite, dependable, never raised his voice. The other half whispered what Maylene hadn't yet said out loud, that the real crime wasn't the shooting, it was what came before. In the weeks that followed, the investigation uncovered details that would leave a nation horrified. But even before the full picture came into view, people started connecting dots. Rumors surfaced. Parents recalled strange things Addie had said. Teachers remembered sudden mood swings. A church volunteer mentioned how the girl flinched when her dad hugged her. Nothing was concrete. But now, in hindsight, it all felt like a puzzle they should have seen earlier. As for Maylene, she didn't say a word during booking. She didn't request a lawyer. She refused to speak to the press. The only thing she asked was, "Is my daughter safe?" But the truth is, Addie hadn't been safe. Not for a while. People close to the family knew that Maylene had taken Addie to therapy months earlier. Night terrors, bedwetting, constant anxiety. Addie couldn't sleep without the light on. She refused to be alone in a room with her father. But every time Maylene raised the concern, Lucas brushed it off as just a phase. "You're seeing things that aren't there," he told her. "Maybe being sheriff is messing with your head." Those words haunted her. Maybe he was right. Maybe it was her mind playing tricks. After all, she'd seen the worst of humanity for over 2 decades. Women bruised, kids broken, families torn apart. Was she projecting? Was she becoming paranoid? She tried to believe him. God knows she tried. But on that June evening, she came home early from a budget meeting. She didn't call ahead, just pulled into the driveway and walked inside. The house was too quiet. The TV was off. The dog didn't bark. She went upstairs, half expecting to find her daughter asleep. Instead, she found something else. something that would break her. What exactly she saw that night has never been publicly detailed. Maybe it never will be. The crime scene report is sealed. But what we do know, from court transcripts and a later psychological interview with Addie, is that Maylene walked in on her husband sexually abusing their 9-year-old daughter. She drew her gun. He turned to face her, pants still around his ankles. And she fired. No hesitation. No shouting. No begging. No second chances. 10 shots. She emptied the clip. When backup arrived, she was still standing over him, still holding her badge. And not once did she cry. Instead, she let them cuff her, read her rights, and put her in the back of a squad car she once rode in as boss. Some called her a vigilante, others a fallen hero, but most agreed on one thing. This wasn't just a murder. This was a reckoning, and it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Before the shooting, the Carter family looked like something out of a Sunday morning commercial. A big, tidy 2-story house in the suburbs of San Antonio. American flag on the porch. Flower beds, neatly trimmed. Inside, hardwood floors, leather furniture, and a wall full of family portraits. The kind where everyone wears matching sweaters and fake smiles. Maylene and Lucas had been married for 13 years. She met him shortly after making detective. He was charming back then, disciplined, supportive, soft-spoken in a way that felt comforting after long days chasing felons. He'd been a Marine, honorably discharged, turned handyman at a local school. Reliable, loyal, a good man, as her mother used to say. But as with most homes where something terrible happens, the warning signs had always been there. You just had to look hard enough. Lucas had rules. Not obvious ones. Subtle. Addie couldn't have friends sleep over. Couldn't close her bedroom door. Couldn't say no when Daddy needed a hug. He was controlling in that quiet, smiling way. The kind of man who always had a reason and made you feel crazy for asking. At church, he was the usher who opened doors for elderly women. At home, he kept tabs on every move Maylene made. What time she got off shift. What route she drove. Who she talked to at the station. And then there was Addie. Sweet, sensitive Addie. A quiet child with big brown eyes and a laugh that had started to fade over the past year. She had always clung to her mom, but lately, she'd become even more attached. She didn't want to be alone. Not even a shower. She'd come to her mom in the middle of the night, whispering that she was scared. Scared of dreams. Scared of the dark. Scared of the shadow by the door. Maylene, who had seen everything from cartel shootouts to child trafficking rings, suddenly felt powerless inside her own home. Her daughter was retreating, fading, and Lucas, calm, steady Lucas, kept saying it was all in her head. Addie's just dramatic, he'd say. All kids go through weird phases. When Maylene suggested therapy, he scoffed. You want to put her in a room with some stranger who'll convince her she's broken? Still, she pushed. And after Addie had one particularly bad night, waking up screaming with scratch marks on her legs, Maylene made an appointment with a child psychologist without asking for permission. That session would later become key evidence in the trial. In it, Addie told the doctor, Daddy touches me when Mommy's not home, but he says it's a game. The doctor was required by law to report it. CPS opened a case, but the investigation stalled. Lucas was interviewed, calmly denied everything. Addie froze during questioning. She said she made it up because she was mad at Daddy. Just like that, the file was closed. Maylene never got over that. She began sleeping with her gun on the nightstand. Not because she feared her husband would hurt her, but because something inside her told her she'd miss something. Something big. Something unspeakable. She started noticing things. Addie flinching when Lucas entered the room. Addie's drawings turning darker. Stick figures with sad faces, some with no eyes. She once caught Addie trying to cut her own hair off in the bathroom, saying she didn't want to look pretty anymore. It was Maylene's worst fear the kind of things she'd seen in the case files of other mothers. Other children, but never thought would be hers. And then came June 12th. She got home early from a community meeting. Lucas hadn't answered her last 2 texts, but that wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the silence. No cartoons on the TV. No barking from the dog. No little girl singing to herself in her room. She walked up the stairs. Each step felt heavier than the last. When she opened Addie's door, what she saw made everything inside her shatter. Later, she'd tell investigators she couldn't remember pulling her gun. Couldn't remember how many times she pulled the trigger. Only that Lucas had turned toward her, and he was smiling. That smile would haunt her forever. By the time it was over, Addie had curled herself into a corner of the room, trembling. Maylene dropped her weapon, sat on the floor, held her daughter in her arms and whispered, "It's over, baby. It's over." But it wasn't over. Not yet. Word spread fast. Even before Maylene was processed, the sheriff's office was fielding calls from every major outlet in the country. Some asking for statements. Some already demanding her resignation. Others asking how a mother, a sheriff, could murder her husband in cold blood. But behind closed doors, officers were already taking sides. One deputy said, "I'd have done the same thing if it were my daughter." Another whispered, "She broke the law." End of story. Meanwhile, Addie was placed in protective custody. Maylene, now labeled inmate number 0049231, sat in a holding cell beneath the very jail she used to run. And up in the evidence room sat her gun, still warm from the truth it had delivered. The truth no one wanted to admit. That evil doesn't always come with a criminal record. Sometimes it sleeps in your bed. It was supposed to be a quiet Monday night. Nothing out of the ordinary. The school year had just ended. The Texas heat was already pushing toward 100 degrees by sunset, and Maylene had just wrapped up a budget meeting with the county commissioners. A dull, frustrating 2-hour debate about vehicle maintenance, training hours, and some outdated computer system. She was tired, bone tired, but for once she was done early. On the drive home, she picked up a strawberry milkshake for Addie, the kind with extra whipped cream and sprinkles on top. She thought it might cheer her up. Lately, her daughter had been different. Withdrawn. Fragile. The kind of fragile that made a mother's gut twist. The kind that doesn't come from scraped knees or bad grades. Maylene didn't call ahead. She wanted to surprise them. It was summer break. Maybe they'd be watching a movie, or maybe Addie would already be in bed. As she pulled into the driveway, everything looked normal. Porch light on. Lucas's truck parked neatly in its usual spot. One of Addie's stuffed animals was still sitting on the porch swing. But when she stepped inside, something felt off. Too quiet. The TV was off. No cartoons. No dishes clinking. No faint sound of Addie's voice singing to herself in the hallway. Just silence. She placed the milkshake on the counter, took off her badge and gun belt, then hesitated. Something about the stillness wrapped around her chest like a vice. She picked up the Glock again and carried it loosely in her right hand as she stepped down the hallway. She called out once. "Lucas." No answer. "Addie." Nothing. The hallway felt longer than usual. The carpet beneath her boots swallowed her footsteps. She passed by the living room, untouched. Dining room, dark. Everything in its place except for the gnawing sense that something wasn't. She climbed the stairs. At the top, she noticed something strange. Addie's door was closed. Addie never slept with the door closed. Maylene's heart began to race. The kind of race she hadn't felt since a standoff in El Paso 5 years ago. Her grip tightened around the Glock. She didn't yell. She didn't knock. She turned the knob and opened the door. What she saw in that moment would never fully make its way into police reports or courtroom testimony. Not in detail. But her expression, and Addie's, told the story clearly enough. Lucas was kneeling beside the bed. Addie was half covered with a blanket. Her shirt was lifted. Lucas's pants were undone, and he looked up like a deer caught in headlights and smiled. That smile shattered whatever restraint Maylene had left in her soul. She raised her weapon. Lucas stood up, maybe to plead, maybe to explain. She didn't let him finish. The first shot hit him in the shoulder. The second caught him in the chest. The third hit his leg. He went down. She kept firing. Neighbors would later tell police they heard 9, maybe 10 shots, all in quick succession. No shouting, no screaming, just a rapid, methodical burst, like someone who'd trained for this moment her entire life. The Glock emptied. Lucas wasn't moving. In the corner of the room, Addie had curled into a ball, hands over her ears. Her eyes were wide, staring at something far away. Maylene dropped the weapon. She didn't run, didn't touch the body. She crossed the room, dropped to her knees beside Addie, and wrapped her arms around the trembling child. "It's okay, baby. You're safe now. You're safe. I promise." She held her daughter like that for 10 minutes, rocking back and forth, whispering. It wasn't until the first deputy arrived, summoned by the neighbors who heard the gunfire, that she finally let go. When the responding officer entered the room, he stopped cold. "Jesus Christ," he muttered. Then louder, "Sheriff Carter, what happened?" Maylene stood, turned slowly. Her uniform was smeared with blood. Her hair had fallen loose from the tight bun she always wore. Her expression was blank, not dazed, not panicked, just quiet. She looked the deputy in the eyes and said, "He was hurting my daughter. I made it stop. That was all." Back at the station, the fallout began instantly. A sheriff shooting her husband inside her own home was headline material. But the circumstances, the fact that it involved allegations of incest, child sexual abuse, and a beloved public official acting as both witness and executioner, it was too much for the town to process. For the country, even. By midnight, her mugshot was already circulating online. A once proud sheriff now wearing an orange jumpsuit, staring dead-eyed into a camera that couldn't possibly capture what she'd just seen, what she'd just done. Meanwhile, Addie was taken to the ER for an immediate exam. The hospital report, later sealed by court order, confirmed what Maylene had suspected and what she had seen with her own eyes. There were clear indicators of ongoing sexual abuse. Lucas had been doing this for a while. No one had seen it. No one had stopped it. Until Maylene came home early. The district attorney was put in an impossible position. Do you charge a mother for murder when a man she killed was abusing their 9-year-old daughter? Do you uphold the law or honor the instinct that made her break it? Public opinion was split viciously. Some said she was a hero, a protector who did what needed to be done. Others said she was dangerous, unstable, and had no right to play judge, jury, and executioner. But one thing no one could deny. The moment she opened that door, Maylene Carter ceased to be sheriff and became something else entirely. A mother at war, and war always leaves blood behind. At exactly 1:42 a.m., just 4 hours after the shooting, Sheriff Maylene Carter was officially booked into the very jail she once ran. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. She was fingerprinted by a rookie deputy she had trained 2 years earlier. Her mugshot was taken by a jail tech who once brought her coffee every Thursday. And as she was walked to a holding cell in ankle cuffs and orange scrubs, there were officers who looked away, not because they disrespected her, but because they didn't know what the hell to feel. Was she a killer? Or was she the only one in that house who did the right thing? Outside the Behar County Sheriff's Office, a small crowd had already formed by morning. Some brought flowers. Others brought signs. One read, "Sheriff Carter saved her daughter. Period." Another, "We don't get to decide who lives or dies." The media didn't wait for facts. They didn't need to. A sheriff shooting her husband 10 times was enough to feed headlines for weeks. Texas lawwoman turns gun on her own family. Justice gone too far. Murder or mercy? The case divided America faster than any court ruling ever could. The story struck a nerve because it wasn't just about a woman pulling a trigger. It was about what people believed justice looked like when the system failed. By noon, a change.org petition demanding her release had already gathered over 200,000 signatures. By 5 p.m., it was on CNN. By 10 p.m., it had its own hashtag Free Sheriff Carter. But not everyone was in her corner. District Attorney Raymond Slater, a straight-laced, by-the-book prosecutor with political ambitions, held a press conference the following day. Standing before reporters, he said, "This is a tragedy. No one disputes that. But no individual, regardless of rank, has the legal right to take a life. There will be a full investigation, and charges will be filed accordingly." The words, "charges will be filed," sent shockwaves through the community. Because until that moment, many still hoped Maylene would walk. Some even expected her to be hailed as a hero. But in the eyes of the law, especially Texas law, the facts were damning. No warrant, no ongoing threat. 10 shots. 1 bullet might have been rage. 2 might have been fear. But 10? That suggested something else. Intent. And that made it murder. Maylene didn't speak to the press, didn't write a letter, didn't cry in court. When her arraignment came 3 days later, she stood before the judge in a beige jumpsuit, hands behind her back, and simply said, "Not guilty." The judge denied bail, citing extreme emotional instability and risk of community influence. That decision only further ignited public outcry. Outside the courthouse, supporters gathered in droves. Some held up photos of Maylene in uniform. Others held candles. Others, mostly survivors of abuse, shared their own stories into live cameras. I told my mom, and she didn't believe me. I wish she had. If my dad had been shot, maybe I wouldn't be in therapy at 38. She saved that little girl from a lifetime of hell. But others weren't so quick to sympathize. One conservative radio host in Dallas screamed into the mic, "This woman played God. She shot a man without a trial. What's next? Public lynchings." On social media, the debate raged. Some called her Mama Justice. Others labeled her a rogue cop with a hero complex. Memes flooded every corner of the internet, from support to satire. One image showed Maylene's mugshot with the caption, "Tell me again how moms can't be superheroes." Another, darker meme showed her with bloodstained hands and the words, "Justice or just vengeance?" In the midst of the chaos, no one talked much about Addie. The 9-year-old was placed into protective custody with a specialized trauma therapist. A gag order was quickly issued to protect her identity, but snippets leaked out. A nurse who worked at the hospital where she was taken anonymously told a reporter, "That little girl didn't flinch when she heard the gunshots. That's what haunts me." It's like she was relieved. Inside the jail, Maylene remained stoic. She refused visitors except for her attorney. She ate little, slept less. A jail guard said she often sat on her bunk staring at the wall, unmoving for hours. But one day, 5 days after the shooting, she made a single request. She wanted to see Addie. That request was denied. The court ruled it was in the child's best interest to remain apart, at least until the preliminary hearing. When Maylene heard the decision, she didn't protest. She just nodded and returned to her cell. Because deep down, she already knew what she'd done couldn't be undone. She had saved her daughter, but she'd also taken her father's life. And no amount of petitions, hashtags, or candlelight vigils could change that. The nation wanted answers. The courts wanted justice. And Maylene? She just wanted to know if her daughter finally slept through the night. In the coming weeks, the trial would begin. Lawyers would argue over evidence, over motive, over what Maylene saw in that room and how much it justified. But in the hearts of millions, the trial had already started, in living rooms, on podcasts, across church pews and school parking lots. Because everyone had an opinion, and no one could agree on what made a mother a murderer or a savior. No one knew what to expect when Addie Carter, just 9 years old, was called to testify. Some believed it was a mistake, a child that young shouldn't have to relive trauma in a courtroom full of strangers. Others said her voice was necessary. Without it, there was only speculation, only emotion. No justice. Judge Halpern allowed it, but with strict parameters. The courtroom would be closed to the public. No press, no cameras, only the judge, the attorneys, the jury, and one therapist allowed to sit quietly by Addie's side. The world would hear her testimony later, secondhand, through transcripts and summary reports. But what was said in that room changed everything. Addie was led into the courtroom wearing a soft blue dress with white buttons. Her hair was neatly braided. In her arms, she clutched a worn-out plush bunny named Lacey. Her eyes scanned the room quickly, pausing only once on the empty defendant's chair where her mother would usually sit. But Maylene wasn't there that day. She had asked not to be. She didn't want to make it harder. The prosecutor, a young woman named Elena Rios, approached slowly. She knelt to eye level. Soft voice. Careful words. "Hi, Addie. Do you remember me from the other day?" Addie nodded, barely. "You're very brave for being here. Okay? Can I ask you some questions? You just answer what you feel. Nothing more." Another nod. The jury leaned forward. Pens hovered. The room held its breath. Elena started gently. "What's your full name?" "Addison Rose Carter," the girl replied, voice small but steady. "And how old are you, Addie?" 9. "And who do you live with now?" "A nice lady named Karen. She lets me keep the light on at night." The therapist beside her placed a reassuring hand on Addie's back. Elena hesitated, then carefully asked, "Addie, can you tell us about your home before? Who lived there with you?" "My mommy and my daddy." "What was that like?" Addie looked down at the floor. "Sometimes it was good. Mommy made pancakes. Daddy fixed my bike. And other times," her voice dropped, "other times, I didn't like bedtime." There was a stillness in the room, the kind that seeps into your spine. "Can you tell us why?" Addie looked up. Her lips quivered. "Because Daddy said I had to play the secret game." Elena's voice cracked just slightly. "What was the secret game, Addie?" "He'd come in after Mommy went to work. He said it was our special time. I wasn't allowed to tell. He said I'd go to jail if I did." "Did he hurt you?" Addie nodded, this time not looking away. "He touched me under my clothes. Lots of times." Gasps were audible, even in a room that had been instructed to stay silent. "Did you tell anyone?" "I told Mommy once. But Daddy said she'd leave us. I didn't want her to go." "What happened the night of June 12th, Addie?" The girl blinked hard. "Mommy came home early. I didn't know. Daddy was in my room. He was doing it again. Mommy opened the door and she screamed." "Did she scream words?" "No, just a loud noise, like a growl. She looked different, like she wasn't Mommy for a second. Then she pulled out her gun." "What happened next?" "I covered my ears. I heard bangs. A lot of bangs. Then nothing." Elena stepped back. "Addie, one last question. Are you afraid of your mom?" Addie turned to the jury. For the first time, her voice strengthened. "No, she's the only person who saved me." And just like that, a courtroom of skeptics turned to stone. Even the most hardened jurors were visibly shaken. One older man wiped his eyes. Another woman turned her head, clearly trying not to cry. Addie was gently led away, still holding her bunny. She looked fragile, yes, but also free. For the first time, she didn't seem afraid. Outside the courthouse, the impact was immediate. The testimony was leaked to the press within hours. Transcripts flooded Twitter, TikTok, Reddit, podcasts. By morning, millions had read or heard her words. And they weren't just reading them, they were feeling them. Talk show hosts wept on live TV. Former abuse survivors recorded videos telling Addie she was brave. Religious leaders who had previously condemned Maylene's actions reversed their stance, saying, "Sometimes God sends justice through broken hands." But the opposition didn't vanish. Critics still argued that Maylene had options. She could have called 911. She could have restrained him. She could have let the law handle it. But those voices grew quieter, less sure. Because now the country had heard from the only witness who mattered, a 9-year-old girl who had survived something unspeakable and who now slept through the night for the first time in over a year. In the days that followed, donations poured in for Addie's therapy and future. Letters arrived by the thousands. Some from mothers, some from women who never told anyone what happened to them. One card simply read, "Your mommy did what mine was too scared to do. You're free now." Meanwhile, inside her cell, Maylene was finally allowed to read the transcript of Addie's testimony. She didn't speak for several minutes. Then, quietly, to her lawyer, she whispered, "Now they know. I wasn't crazy. I was just a mother." And for the first time since the arrest, she smiled. The trial of Sheriff Maylene Carter was unlike anything the state of Texas had ever seen. There have been high-profile cases before, cartel bosses, corrupt judges, even serial killers, but nothing like this. Nothing that cut this deep into the American conscience. A decorated law officer, a murdered husband, a 9-year-old survivor, and a mother who said she had no choice but to pull the trigger 10 times. By the time jury selection began, the courthouse was under lockdown. Media trucks lined the block. Protesters and supporters clashed daily outside the iron gates. One side holding up signs that read, "No one is above the law," the other waving banners that said, "Let Mama go." Inside, the tension was electric. The prosecution was led by District Attorney Raymond Slater, a man known for his no-nonsense style and his laser focus on facts. To him, this wasn't about morality. It wasn't about pain or sympathy. It was about what the law said. And the law said, you can't kill someone unless they're threatening your life in that moment. This case, he told the jury in his opening statement, is not about whether or not Lucas Carter did wrong. It's about how we, as a society, choose to respond to wrong. Do we follow process? Or do we give people the right to execute others based on what they believe to be justice? Then he pointed toward Maylene, who sat silently beside her defense team, her eyes unreadable. She is not on trial because she was a bad mother. She is on trial because she became a killer. The defense attorney, Carla Medina, a firebrand civil rights lawyer brought in from Houston, saw things very differently. Her voice was calm, steady, almost too calm, like a blade pressed flat against your skin before it cuts. You're going to hear testimony. You're going to read medical reports. You're going to see evidence that Lucas Carter was not just a man. He was a monster hiding in plain sight. He abused a little girl. For months, maybe longer. And when Maylene Carter, a mother, a sheriff, a human being, walked in on a happening, she did what this system couldn't. She protected her daughter. Then, she leaned on the jury box, stared each juror in the eye, and said, if the law demands that a mother watch her child be violated so she doesn't risk murder charges, then maybe it's the law that's broken, not her. The courtroom fell into silence. Over the next 2 weeks, the trial unfolded like a Greek tragedy. The forensic team confirmed what everyone already knew. Lucas Carter had been shot 10 times, mostly in the torso. No defensive wounds. No weapon on him. No signs of a struggle. But the real testimony came from the psychologist who evaluated Addie, who stated clearly, this child showed every textbook sign of prolonged sexual abuse, shame, night terrors, dissociation, self-harm ideation. Her statements were consistent, and her fear of her father was profound. The defense called witnesses. Addie's elementary school teacher, who remembered the child flinching when her father touched her shoulder. A church nursery volunteer who found it strange that Lucas always insisted on being in the room during Sunday school. A former neighbor who said Addie once ran into her yard barefoot and crying but wouldn't explain why. Each witness painted the same picture, a child quietly drowning and no one hearing the scream. The prosecution countered with character witnesses for Lucas, a coworker who called him harmless, a family friend who said he adored that little girl, and even a former Army buddy who insisted Lucas was the most disciplined man I ever knew. But no one, not one person, could explain away Addie's testimony. So Slater pivoted. "This is no longer about the child," he said during closing arguments. "This is about how the accused responded. She didn't call for backup. She didn't try to stop him and arrest him. She didn't take her daughter and run. She executed him in a rage. 10 shots. Not 2. 10. Then he paused for effect. This wasn't self-defense. This was revenge. Carla Medina rose slowly. Her eyes were bloodshot. She looked exhausted and angry. She didn't run because running wouldn't have changed what happened. She didn't call for backup because, in that moment, there was no time. She didn't shoot to scare. She shot to end the nightmare. Because Lucas Carter didn't just steal Addie's innocence. He did it in the one place a child is supposed to be safe. Her bedroom. Her sanctuary. Then she pointed to the jury. If that were your daughter, if you saw what she saw, would you wait for a warrant? Or would you pull the trigger and pray that no other child would ever be hurt by that man again? The jury deliberated for 3 days. Outside, the country braced for a verdict. People took sides on Twitter, in barbershops, in church pews. Some called it the trial that redefined motherhood. Others said it was the day due process died. And then finally, the foreman stood. We find the defendant, Maylene Carter, guilty of voluntary manslaughter. Gasps. Silence. Tears on both sides. It wasn't murder, but it wasn't freedom either. The judge sentenced her to 8 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 2 for good behavior. A reduced sentence. Some said merciful, others said a betrayal of justice. As she was led away in cuffs, Maylene didn't cry. She looked toward the gallery, where a social worker sat quietly beside Addie and gave her daughter a single nod. She had made peace with the cost, because in the end, it wasn't about freedom, or vengeance, or reputation. It was about one thing, a little girl who finally got to sleep through the night. The moment the word guilty echoed through the courtroom, you could almost feel the temperature in Texas shift. Not just in San Antonio, but across the entire state and far beyond its borders. It was like someone had taken a knife and sliced straight through the soul of the country. On paper, it was a compromise. Voluntary manslaughter. 8 years. Parole possible after 2. Not murder. Not an acquittal. Just somewhere in between. But in reality, no one left that courthouse feeling like justice had truly been served. Outside, the crowd exploded, not in celebration, but in confusion and fury. Some supporters of Maylene collapsed into each other's arms, crying. Others screamed through bullhorns, calling the verdict a betrayal of every abused child in America. One woman, holding a picture of her own daughter, shouted into a camera, "They just told every parent in this country that protecting your kid makes you a criminal." Across the street, a much smaller crowd clapped solemnly. One man in a cowboy hat held a sign that read, "No one is above the law, not even grieving mothers." The divide wasn't just on the courthouse steps. It was in homes, churches, schools, police departments, and dinner tables. People who had known each other for years were suddenly on opposite sides of an invisible line. Some said the sentence was too harsh. Others said it was not nearly enough. On talk radio in Dallas, One conservative host fumed. We're setting a dangerous precedent. You don't like what someone's doing? Pull a gun and shoot them. That's not justice. That's vigilante chaos. Meanwhile, over in Austin, a women's rights activist fired back on a live podcast. You want to talk about chaos? Try being a 9-year-old girl molested in her own bed while everyone looks the other way. Maylene Carter didn't create the chaos. She ended it. Even within law enforcement, there was no consensus. A retired sheriff from El Paso told CNN, "I don't condone what she did, but I understand it. Hell, I might have done the same thing." But a former FBI profiler disagreed. If we allow emotions to dictate who lives and who dies, we no longer have a justice system. We have a Wild West lynch mob. And in the center of it all sat Addie, 9 years old, orphaned in a way, living with a court-appointed guardian in an undisclosed location, attending therapy 5 days a week. Her words had shaken a nation, but she wasn't watching the news. She wasn't reading the editorials or hearing her name on morning shows. She was just trying to learn how to be a child again. According to a confidential source close to the case, Addie was allowed to send a letter to her mother through a therapist shortly after the verdict. It read, "Mommy, I love you. I'm not scared anymore. I want to hug you soon. Please don't be sad. I know why you did what you did." Maylene, upon reading the letter, reportedly cried for the first time since the night of the shooting. Meanwhile, across the country, the verdict ignited legislative discussions. In Texas, a state senator proposed the so-called Maylene Law, a bill that would allow reduced sentencing for parents who commit violent acts against someone in the process of harming their child. The bill never passed committee. Too controversial, too raw, too soon. But it sparked something, a conversation America hadn't had in decades. Where does justice end and vengeance begin? On social media, the case became a cultural fault line. Twitter threads dissected every nuance. TikTok creators role-played courtroom scenes. True crime YouTubers flooded the platform with titles like, "She shot her husband for touching their daughter," "Hero or Murderer," "The Sheriff Mom Who Took Justice into Her Own Hands," 10 shots, 1 verdict. The Maylene Carter case explained. Debates raged in the comment sections. Some people posted their own stories of abuse and survival. Others accused the defense of manipulating the jury with emotion. But buried beneath the noise was a quieter truth. No verdict could have satisfied everyone, because no one wants to imagine they could be in Maylene's shoes. And even fewer want to admit they might have pulled the trigger too. At the prison where Maylene was housed, she quickly became a myth. Inmates whispered about the sheriff mom. Some respected her. Some feared her. Most left her alone. Guards said she kept to herself, worked in the library, wrote letters she never mailed. She never asked for early parole, never filed appeals, never complained. She simply waited. 2 years would pass. Maybe more. Maybe she'd serve the full 8. It didn't matter. In her mind, the sentence had already been paid in full the night she opened that door. Back in San Antonio, the Carter house was sold quietly through an agent. The new owners gutted the upstairs. New walls. New carpet. They didn't ask questions. But those who drove past still slowed down. Still whispered. That house, that sheriff, that little girl, they had all become part of something bigger. A symbol of how far a parent will go when the world fails their child. Some called it justice. Some called it murder. But no one called it forgettable. Because from that moment forward, every jury, every lawyer, every mother and father in America would remember the name Maylene Carter and ask themselves, if it had been my child in that room, would I have done anything different? 2 years came and went, quietly, without headlines, without hashtags, without chaos. In early spring, just before her 47th birthday, Maylene Carter walked out of the gates of the Gatesville Correctional Facility wearing simple jeans, a gray sweatshirt, and no handcuffs. No reporters waited for her. No crowd. No applause. Just the soft hum of Texas wind and a caseworker with a clipboard. Her release had been approved a month earlier under a parole recommendation for exceptional conduct and low recidivism risk. The board didn't make a statement. Neither did the governor. They didn't need to. The world had already moved on to new scandals, new tragedies. But not Addie. Now 11 years old, Addie waited in the back seat of a dark blue SUV parked just beyond the prison gates. She hadn't seen her mother in person in over 700 days. And yet, the moment Maylene stepped out of the facility, her daughter recognized her instantly. She ran. No cameras captured the moment. No news anchors narrated it. But a staff worker later said, "It was like watching two halves of a broken thing come back together." Addie wrapped her arms around her mother's waist and buried her face in her chest. Maylene held her and whispered, "You got so tall." And Addie whispered back, "I never stopped waiting." The two moved to a small, anonymous town in northern Texas under a new name provided through a victim's protection clause. Maylene wasn't allowed to serve as an officer ever again, and she didn't want to. She found part-time work at a local hardware store, read books at night, grew tomatoes in the backyard. But most of all, she just showed up to school meetings, to art shows, to every bedtime story Addie asked for. It took time. Addie didn't always sleep through the night. Sometimes she'd still flinch at sudden noises. Some days, she'd burst into tears for no reason. But with therapy, patience, and the unwavering presence of her mother, she began to build something new. Trust, safety, childhood. No one in the town knew the full story. They didn't need to. People only saw a quiet mother and her daughter who kept mostly to themselves and always said thank you. Some neighbors speculated. Some guessed. But no one asked directly, and Maylene never offered. She didn't attend survivor events. Didn't write a book. She turned down every interview request, not because she was ashamed, but because she refused to turn pain into performance. The past didn't need to be forgotten. It just needed to stop defining them. One rainy afternoon, Addie, now in 6th grade, was assigned a writing project called Who is Your Hero? She came home, pulled out her notebook, and, without hesitation, wrote the first sentence. "My hero is my mom, because when no one believed me, she did." She didn't describe the night. She didn't have to. She just wrote about a woman who never gave up, who took the fall, who took the heat, and who, no matter what the world said, put her child first. The teacher returned the assignment with a small note in the corner. "This is the most powerful essay I've read all year." No one could undo what happened in that upstairs bedroom. No one could erase the bullet holes. But in a quiet Texas town, far from the noise and judgment, a mother and daughter were slowly rewriting the story. Not as a tragedy, but as survival. Final narration, Dan Show Video YouTube, Ket Lie. In a world that often asks mothers to be strong, but never angry, never violent, never messy, Maylene Carter crossed a line. And when she did, she forced America to ask, is there ever a moment when justice is louder than the law? And if that moment comes, will you pull the trigger or walk away?